Hello sewing people of the internet. In this video I'm going to swap the motor from this sewing machine into this sewing machine. Disclaimer right up front, I am not a trained sewing machine mechanic. I know almost nothing about electric motors, and you shouldn't take anything that I say as advice. If you're going to try to do something like this, definitely make sure you know what you're doing or seek out the assistance of someone who does. I'm presenting this information purely for entertainment purposes. That said, this stuff can be pretty simple, but it also could be dangerous, so make sure you don't work on a machine that's plugged in, and just be careful. Also, doing anything I do may break your sewing machine, so I wouldn't work on something that you're not willing to permanently lose. So the backstory is this machine, which is a Pfaff Hobbymatic 801, was brought to me by a friend. She used this machine for like the past 37 years, quite enthusiastically, and the motor stopped working. She took it to a sewing machine repair place. They said the motor wasn't working and they couldn't do anything about it. I've tried to figure out a way to get the motor to work again and failed. So plan B was to find a new motor, and it's been nearly impossible to find. This machine came from Germany and uses a 240 volt motor. However, my friend was able to find this Hobbymatic 807 that's a US model and has a 110 volt motor. To the best of my knowledge, the motors are physically identical and should be a direct swap. The original thought was if this machine was good enough, she would just use the newly purchased machine. But this machine is making a weird noise, and I made a video about that. You can check it out in the card. And I can't find the source of the noise. Here's the noise. It sounds really rough. So because of that, I think the simplest thing to do is just to take the working motor out of this machine and put it into this known good machine. And unfortunately, this other machine can be a collection of spare parts for this one. The 807 has some additional stitch options that the 801 does not, but my friend doesn't need those, so she's going to stick with what she likes. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I remove the motor from this machine and replace it into this one. This is the motor from the 801, and interestingly, or at least interestingly to me compared to the machines I'm accustomed to, this engages the hand wheel on the motor by friction. This rubber wheel on the shaft of the electric motor just rubs against the hand wheel, and that's how it drives the machine. I have zero sewing experience with these machines, other than just running a few test pieces on them. I don't know that I would expect that to be the strongest engagement system, and for sewing the heavier materials that I mostly like to sew, I'm not sure that this would be the machine I would choose, but if you happen to have one or you get a deal on one, I mean, it seems like it works fine, and my friend's been using hers quite happily for years, so it might be a great machine, but that was just a little curious to me. To access the motors on these machines, I need to remove the bed or the bottom plate of this machine. There's a screw missing from the 801, so I'll be able to take one from the 807 to replace that if the motor swap is successful and the 801 is the machine that ends up being used permanently. The motors on these machines are connected to a knob on the side that allows the motor to be disengaged from the hand wheel. So with this lever turned in one direction, stepping on the pedal will turn the motor, but it won't turn the machine. I'm not sure why. I'm just going to disconnect this spring. No, really, I'm just going to disconnect the spring, or I'll break it. Well, I guess we're committed now. Note to self, don't use pliers on old plastic. I'm sure if I'm absolutely pressed to, I can figure out a way to reattach the spring with some other method, but that wasn't a great idea. The plug for this machine has to be removed to get the motor out. I want to make sure to get a photo of the orientation of the wiring before I pull this plug out. The plug consists of these 3 blades, and there are 3 slots into which they are inserted. And I want to make sure I know which blade goes into which slot. Otherwise that could be a problem, I guess. I don't know anything about electrical stuff, but I feel like that would be bad. This screw here is the motor mount. I think that's a posi drive screw, which is very similar to a Phillips head. But it is not a Phillips head. But I don't have a posi drive, so I'm going to use a Phillips. There's another screw on the front side. Yeah, I forgot. I've got to take these blades off. The wiring is routed through a housing inside the machine, and these blades won't fit through, so I have to remove them. Another good reason to have a photo of which wires go into which blade. And just black. I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but there's this plastic housing that the wiring goes through. In many tutorials and instructions, the term installation is the reverse of removal is often used, and I've found that frustrating from time to time because it never seems like it's quite that simple. So, despite the fact that this is not a tutorial on how to swap the motor between these 2 machines, I will show you how the motor goes into the other machine. On each side of the motor are these plastic pieces with a curved washer. There's no way I'm going to get this into focus, but it's a washer that's not completely flat. That's where the screws from the outside of the machine secure the motor. So you want to make sure those are in place. The motor can really only go one way. It's oriented so that the screws are to the front and back, and the wiring is closest to the channel that the wiring has to go through, and that the arm for the spring is reachable by the spring, so you can only really put it one way. So this is a little bit of what I mean about the installation as the reverse of removal, in that removing this motor just meant pulling the wiring right out of that housing. Getting it back into that housing is a little bit more problematic. And these screw receiving plastic pieces and washers tend to fall out, and only one can be held in by gravity, at least in this orientation. I suspect I'm going to spend more time trying to get this back in with the motor inside here than if I would just take it out. So that's what I'm going to do. There's probably a service manual or something that has an easy way to do this, but yeah, I think the trick is to get the motor in place and then run the wiring through. It's much easier that way. Okay, now we can run the wires. Okay, These 3 wires are from the motor, and then these 2 are from the lamp on the end of the machine, the light bulb. So now I'm going to refer to my pictures, put the blades back on, and put them into the plug. So I'm going to use the spring from the 801 since I broke the plastic piece off of the one on the 807, and hopefully I won't break this one putting it on. The spring hooks to this post here, and then the plastic piece hooks to this arm on the motor. I think I'm going to hook the plastic on the motor first in the hopes of not breaking that plastic piece. Okay. And now, before we go too much farther, I'm going to plug this in and make sure that everything's working before I reassemble everything. Well, I put the plug in right side up. That's a good start. That noise sounds very familiar. I don't know, maybe it's just the noise these things make. Alright, I've got the machine unplugged. I'm going to go ahead and reassemble it, and we'll give it a try. So a few minutes passed since the last clip that I shot, and you'll notice the table's empty. The owner of the 2 machines came to see how she felt about the noise the machine was making, and she felt comfortable enough with it that she took her machines and is going to sew with them. Here's what I think is the deal. Unfortunately, I don't have the things to show you anymore, but on the end of the motor there's a little rubber wheel that engages with the hand wheel of the machine in order to drive the machine. Apparently what Pfaff wanted you to do as the owner of the machine is to disengage the motor whenever it wasn't in use, so that that rubber wheel would not be pressed against the hand wheel of the machine. Apparently sitting there in that position for a length of time creates a flat spot, which would explain that vibration. Thank you, David, for commenting on the previous video on this topic and providing that information to me. So here's what I theorized. My friend used her machine so regularly that it never sat long enough to develop that flat spot. She never used that knob to disengage it. I don't think she knew what it was for. And the other machine, the new machine that we got to use the motor for her machine, I think that one sat for a very long time. I don't know if regular use will make that flat spot go away, or wear itself back in, smooth out, or if it could potentially cause damage to the machine. Where we left it is she's going to use the machine and see what happens. If it becomes troublesome or she doesn't like it, she'll bring it back and I'll swap out that rubber wheel. There's just one screw to do it, but I got to pull the motor back out, and we kind of figured, you know, it's working at least. Let's not take any more chances with it. So that's where I am with this machine project. Again, this video wasn't intended to teach you how to swap motors between machines, but just to kind of show you, maybe in kind of a worst case scenario, what's involved with it. Many domestic machines have the motor mounted to the outside where it would be far easier to remove and replace one. But even with this one, it really wasn't that difficult of a job, just a little bit time consuming. If you like this video and the other videos I make, one way you can support me is by buying a t-shirt or a sticker or a coffee mug from the Teespring shelf you'll see below, or there's a link in the description if you don't see that. That really helps me out a lot. Clicking like is super helpful. If you know other people who might be interested in these kinds of videos, please share my videos with them. And if you're not a subscriber, I'd love it if you subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.